The grandfather clock in the hall chimed two, its heavy, bronze notes swallowed by the humid New Orleans night. The house, a grand but slightly decaying Garden District mansion, was a tomb of oppressive quiet. The only sound was the drone of cicadas from the overgrown garden and the faint, almost predatory hum of a laptop seeping from the crack beneath my stepson's bedroom door. My bare feet made no sound on the cool, cypress floorboards, each step a deliberate, silent press, as if I were navigating a field of broken glass. The air, thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and decay, felt heavy in my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird desperate for release. I'd only come downstairs for a glass of water, a cool antidote to the restless heat that clung to the sheets and kept me awake. But now, standing in the dim, moonlit hallway, I was paralyzed, my gaze fixed on that sliver of cold, blue light. Upstairs, my husband, Arthur, slept soundly, a man of profound and steady habits, oblivious to the storm gathering in his own home. I should have retreated. I should have climbed the winding staircase back to the safety of our bed, ignored the siren call of that light, and pretended I'd seen nothing. But curiosity, that venomous, beautiful serpent, coiled in my gut and pulled me forward. That single choice was the first thread I pulled, and it unraveled everything. Welcome to the heartstrings and scars, where we unravel the untold stories of love, betrayal, and the life-changing lessons they leave behind. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. We promise you stories that will make you reflect, question, and maybe even see yourself in the characters we share. My name is Eliza. I am 39. And for 8 years I have been married to Arthur. He is an architect, a man who builds beautiful, lasting things, a man who made me feel anchored in a world that had always felt like quicksand. His son, Julian, was 20 when we met, a brooding, quiet boy lost in a world of art history books and dissonant music from his headphones. I was never Mom to him, only ever Eliza, and I was content with that. My first marriage had left me scarred and cautious, and Arthur felt like a second chance at solid ground. Julian moved to New York after university, and for a while, our lives were placid. But 6 months ago, at 26, he returned. An art gallery he'd been curating in Soho had folded spectacularly, and he'd come home, jobless and coiled with a new, dangerous energy. He moved into the first-floor guest suite to regroup. Arthur was delighted to have his brilliant, complicated son back under his roof. I told myself it was temporary. But this was not the shy boy I remembered. Julian was taller now, with a lean, predatory grace. He had a quiet confidence that filled a room, his dark eyes lingering a fraction too long, his smiles carrying a weight I couldn't decipher. I dismissed it as the arrogance of a young man humbled by failure. I was wrong. That night, as I peered through the crack in his door, my world spun off its axis. Julian sat on the edge of his bed, the laptop's glow carving his face into sharp, shadowed angles. His expression was one of intense, almost reverent concentration as his fingers moved over the trackpad. Then I saw the screen. A video. Not just any video. It was us, Arthur and me, in our bedroom, in moments of unguarded intimacy, moments that were ours alone, sacred and private, moments no one else was ever meant to see. A wave of nausea crashed over me. The water glass in my hand trembled, condensation slick against my palm. How had he gotten this? How long had this been happening? And the most terrifying question of all, why wasn't I screaming? Why didn't I burst through that door and shatter the obscene tableau with my rage? Instead, I stood frozen, held captive by a horrifying cocktail of fear and a dark, traitorous flicker of intrigue. In Julian's gaze, I saw more than just violation. I saw a possessive, hungry fixation that pinned me to the spot. I backed away, my breath a shallow, ragged thing, and crept back to my room. I slid into bed beside Arthur, his steady breathing a monument to a life that was, in that instant, already a ruin. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. The humid air felt like a shroud. I avoided Julian, my conversations with Arthur strained and hollow. The image of that glowing screen was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Julian's gaze haunted me, a phantom touch on my skin. I told myself I was disgusted, repulsed, but a treacherous, shameful part of me felt something else, a vile thrill I refused to name. When he passed me in the narrow hall, his arm brushing mine, my skin erupted in gooseflesh. At breakfast, over chicory coffee and beignet, his smile was casual, but his eyes held our shared, ugly secret, and my breath hitched in my throat. Why did a part of me, the part one hated most, feel seen? I was a faithful wife, a good person. I had built a life on the foundations of loyalty and love. But a dangerous current was pulling at those foundations, threatening to sweep me out into a dark, unknown sea. One evening, Arthur left for a conference in Charleston. "Be good, you two," he'd said with a teasing smile, kissing my cheek before his car disappeared down the oak-lined street. The house suddenly felt cavernous, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing an already immaculate marble countertop, when Julian's voice sliced through the quiet. "We need to talk." He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his gaze a physical weight. My heart leaped into my throat. He stepped closer, the air crackling between us. "I know you saw," he said, a slow, sly smile curling his lips. "What did I see?" I whispered, my voice a thread. He leaned in, his breath warm and smelling of bourbon against my ear. "That you're even more beautiful in person." My face burned with a volatile mix of shame and rage. This was wrong, unspeakably wrong. He was my stepson, but his words landed like a spark on dry tinder. I hadn't stopped thinking about it. What followed was a perilous, unspoken dance. Julian pushed every boundary. His touches became less accidental, a hand on the small of my back as I passed, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me a book. He started leaving his door ajar at night, the laptop's blue glow an open, taunting invitation. At dinner, his foot would graze mine under the heavy mahogany table, and I wouldn't pull away fast enough. Worse, I began to play along. My nightgowns became silkier, my robe left hanging open just a little longer. I told myself I was testing him, that I was in control, but I was a fool. Julian was always 2 steps ahead. Then the storm hit. It came on suddenly, the sky turning a bruised, violent purple. The wind rose to a howl, rattling the century-old window panes. The power went out with a sudden finality, plunging the house into a blackness so complete it felt alive. I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, when Julian's voice came from right behind me, low and steady. "It's just a storm, Eliza." His warmth pressed against my back, and his hands came to rest on my waist, branding me through the thin fabric of my dress. My heart pounded a deafening rhythm against my ribs. "Stop," I managed, but my voice was a broken, trembling thing. He leaned closer, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. "Make me." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face in a stark, momentary flash. His eyes were black pools of pure, undiluted desire. I should have shoved him away. I knew about consent, about choice, about the sanctity of a no, but in that charged, breathless moment, I didn't say it. I let him turn me, his hands burning paths across my skin. The cold marble of the counter pressed into my back as his mouth found mine, urgent and reckless. For the first time in years, I felt searingly, terrifyingly alive, free from the comfortable weight of routine. But it was poison, and I was drinking it down. When the lights flickered and then flared back to life, reality crashed down on us. Julian stepped back, his chest rising and falling, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he turned and left me there, my clothes disheveled, my heart a traitor in my chest. What had I done? Arthur came home the next day, kissing my cheek, completely unaware of the wreckage. Julian was a master of normalcy, joking with his father, offering me coffee as if the world hadn't ended and been reborn in our kitchen the night before. I tried to convince myself it was a single, catastrophic lapse. But 3 nights later, a soft knock on my bedroom door woke me. Arthur snored softly beside me. The clock glowed. 2 a.m. It was Julian. Against every shred of sanity, I slipped out of bed and opened the door. He stood there, bare-chested, wearing only a pair of low-slung sweatpants. "We need to talk," he whispered. I glanced at Arthur's sleeping form and followed Julian down to the damp, cool basement, the air thick with the smell of earth and old wine. "This can't happen again," I said, clutching my robe tight. He leaned against an old washing machine, a smirk playing on his lips. "What's stopping us?" "I'm married to your father," I hissed. He stepped toward me, his finger tracing the line of my arm, and my body betrayed me all over again, trembling at his touch. The next month was a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt. Hasty kisses in the pantry, his hand on my thigh under the dinner table as Arthur discussed blueprints, each transgression deepening my self-loathing while fueling a desperate, addictive craving. Then, one morning I realized, 2 weeks late, panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat as I stared at the positive pregnancy test on the marble vanity. "Eliza, you okay in there?" Arthur's voice came through the door. I shoved the test into my pocket. "Just an upset stomach," I mumbled. Later, after he left for work, I sat on the edge of the tub, the 2 pink lines of verdict. It could be Arthur's. It could be Julian's. The uncertainty was a physical agony. I confronted Julian, shoving the test into his hand. His eyes didn't show shock or fear. They lit up. "This is perfect," he said, a genuine, terrifying smile on his face. "Now we can stop hiding." I recoiled, as if struck. "You think I would leave Arthur for you?" His expression hardened into something cold and cruel. "You already have, Eliza. Every time you let me touch you, you're mine." He gave me an ultimatum, 3 days to tell Arthur, or he would. I was trapped. That night, I made my choice. I packed a single suitcase, left my wedding ring and a short, cowardly note on the bedside table, and drove out of the city into the black, swampy night. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Arthur, then Julian. I threw it onto the passenger seat and ignored them. At dawn, I pulled into a rundown motel, the peeling paint and flickering neon sign a perfect reflection of my shattered life. I collapsed onto the bed and sobbed, a raw, animal sound of pure grief. I had betrayed everyone, most of all myself. And I was pregnant, possibly with my stepson's child. Arthur's voicemail was kind, pleading, full of a confusion that was more painful than any accusation. Then a sharp, insistent pounding on the motel room door. "Eliza, open up." Julian's voice. My blood ran cold. How had he found me? I opened the door to see him, disheveled and wild-eyed. Behind him stood Arthur, his face a mask of disbelief, anger, and profound hurt. "What were you thinking, running off like this?" Arthur demanded, his voice cracking. Julian turned to him, his voice like ice. "She's pregnant," he said, delivering the line like a death blow. "And it's mine." Arthur staggered back, as if he'd been physically struck. His eyes, the kind, steady eyes I had loved, broke right in front of me. "How long?" he whispered. Julian smirked. "A while." A guttural, wounded sound escaped Arthur's throat. He turned and stormed away, the slam of his car door a final, irrevocable judgment. Julian laughed, a hollow, cruel sound. Well, that went well. In that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time. It wasn't passion or love. It was a game. A power play. He had orchestrated everything. The videos, the seduction, the final, brutal revelation. "You planned this," I said, my voice shaking with rage and revulsion. He shrugged, a gesture of absolute indifference. "I wanted you, Eliza. The rest is just collateral damage." I grabbed my purse, but he seized my wrist, his grip like iron. "Where do you think you're going?" I met his gaze, my fear incinerated by a sudden, pure defiance. "Watch me." I walked out of that room, out of that life, and didn't look back. The next morning, at a diner in a town whose name I didn't know, I sat in a booth, clutching a cold cup of coffee. A waitress named Maria, her eyes kind and weary, refilled my cup. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said gently. I broke down, the whole sordid story pouring out of me in a torrent of tears. She just held my hand, her grip steady and warm. "You start over," she said. "You're stronger than you think." 2 weeks later, Arthur's divorce papers arrived at the small studio apartment I'd rented above a laundromat in a different state. There were no demands, no angry letters. Just a clean, silent break that hurt more than any fight. At 7 months pregnant, I was working in a quiet bookstore, the gentle kicks of the baby a constant, living reminder of my choices. One rainy afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and Julian walked in, dripping wet. "You look good pregnant," he said, as if no time had passed. My hand flew to my stomach, a protective shield. "There is no us. Julian, leave." He stepped closer, whispering about a DNA test, about his rights. But something in me had hardened. I stood my ground, my voice clear and cold, knowing my child deserved a life free from his poison. When I went into labor, I was alone. I timed my contractions in the back of a taxi, the city lights blurring through my tears. My daughter, Cora, was born at dawn, her face perfect and new, a promise of a fresh start. Julian found us, of course, showing up at the hospital with a lawyer, all sharp angles and demands. But with the help of the bookstore owner, a formidable older woman who'd seen it all, I vanished. A new name, a new city, leaving no trace behind. On a bus heading west, I held Cora close, the rhythm of the wheels a lullaby. I whispered promises to her, promises of honesty and safety, of a life built on truth. I wrote one last letter to Arthur, a confession and an apology I knew he might never read. "I'm so sorry," I wrote. "Our daughter has your eyes. I will raise her to be good and kind. I can't undo what I've done, but I will spend my life making it right for her." This story is not just a confession. It is a warning. Relationships are built on the sacred ground of trust, respect, and boundaries. I desecrated that ground. I ignored the lessons we all think we know, that desire can be a blinding, destructive force, that secrets are a cancer that devours everything good. Healthy love requires communication, unwavering respect, and the courage to say no, especially when it is the hardest thing to do. I learned that lesson in the ruins of my own life. My hope is that you will not have to.